I think when, as you guys hear Jim talk, he'll talk about being an attack style front. So guys that really do get up the field, penetrate, really use either quickness or power to create disruption behind the line of scrimmage. So that's the general picture that you'll get from our defense.
In a larger sense, did the problems in defense, particularly against the run, cause the organization to rethink body size? Are you tight? Are you too light? Are you too light?
Yeah, I think that's like less really a function of size, to be honest with you, Tony. That really hasn't been like a major talking point with our defensive system. It's probably been a little bit more style and what we'll ask our guys to do, and also at some spots just quality.
Defensive side of the ball was a hot topic for Andrew Berry. Browns' 4 top linebackers ended the season on injured reserve. Pretty significant injuries create some uncertainty at the linebacker position moving forward. Additionally, Greg Newsome made it clear he really isn't crazy about playing the slot cornerback. He'd like to play outside. It's where guys make more money, to be frank about it. Andrew Berry talked about the uncertainty at linebacker as well as Greg Newsome.
Well, every position to some degree is, I guess, uncertain at this point in the year. I think that it's a fair observation that we do have guys that are up and guys that are coming back from injuries. That room could change or could look a little bit different, but that's not something that we'll probably know for sure until we get into it.
Do you have timelines for Anthony and Sione?
Yeah, we feel good about how they're progressing. We feel really good about it.
JOK.
I say this. Yeah, no, it's all good. So all of our guys ended up on IR. We feel really good about how they're progressing.
So Anthony and Sione are under contract. So does that mean you're looking forward to getting them under contract?
It's a possibility. Again, we'll meet with all of our guys. Look, both those two guys, they played good football for us. They were really good in the locker room. But again, it's just largely going to depend on how the whole puzzle fits.
Andrew, have you spoken to Greg Newsome about his role moving forward? I mean, he didn't seem thrilled to necessarily be playing the slot last year. So have you spoken to him about that? And sort of how do you navigate that?
We always have conversations with our guys, whether it's at the end of the season or into the off season. Feel good about where Greg is. He's going to be a pretty big part of what we're doing moving forward. I think Greg, one of his value adds is the fact that he can play outside and inside. But we think he's a good young player, and I know Jim's excited to work with him as well.
Andrew Berry admitted that as we sit here, February, getting ready to go into March, the roster needs some work. Without question, needs a lot of work. Andrew Berry talked about the approach to free agency as well as the draft, the two main areas where you can improve the roster. And really, the draft starts getting serious, as does free agency here at the Combine. Here's Andrew Berry on improving through the draft as well as free agency.
Obviously, the past few weeks, we spent a lot of time just looking at everything, soup to nuts, organizationally, coaching staff, roster, everything across football operations, to make sure that we can, make the necessary improvements to really be where we want to be in the 2023 season. We always get really excited about the Combine because it's really our first look with the upcoming draft class. We spent probably upwards of the last 10 or 11 months researching these players, scouting these players, and it really gives us our first, interpersonal touch point where we get to spend a little bit more time with them, a little bit more extended time with them here in Indianapolis. So that's always very exciting for us, and it really kicks off the 2023 offseason for us. So we enter the year with really energized and with a ton of enthusiasm and looking forward to improving the team and the roster. So I don't think anything really changes in the draft and free agency process in terms of the preparation. I've said this a number of times that we really go into each offseason as if we have an expansion roster. We really go through it like need agnostic. How that influences decision making, because the reality of it is when you do have an expensive quarterback, you do have a different set of constraints in terms of roster building. That may change. That may change from year to year. But how we go through the approach and how we go through the preparation, that really doesn't. I'm sorry, do you mind repeating that one more time?
Is that a benefit then to kind of have him at a set number for the next couple of years, kind of know what you're going to be at cap-wise?
I don't know that it's necessarily a benefit, because even that can change based on your yearly strategy. That's not to suggest that that's not a contract that could get touched at some point in the next several years. So yeah, I wouldn't say that in and of itself drives anything. Sorry, go ahead, Tony.
Right now you have one center on the contract. Is Nick Harris the starting center?
To be determined, quite honestly, Tony. I think there's a lot of work to do on the roster. We're sitting here in, say, February, or say first day of March? Okay, last day of February. There's a lot that needs to be done until we get to August and we're competing for roster spots. It could be on the table, but there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what we can do from a cap perspective.
All right, so Andrew Berry talked plenty about the defense. He also talked about the offense some. When you talk about the offense, big question is Deshaun Watson. How does the offense look at with Deshaun Watson as the quarterback? How do they tailor it around his skill set? Andrew Berry talked about Watson, the franchise quarterback that the Browns have wanted, as well as what he needs to see from second-year wide receiver David Bell.
We're pleased with where Deshaun is, pleased with the progress that he's made since he's been with us, and certainly anticipate him having a very strong year on and off the field going into 23. I'm sorry? Yeah, I think for all of our young players, we'd like to see them, continue to make steps forward. I think David, as a rookie player, really did a nice job just in terms of his reliability, whether that's mentally. We were able to put him in a number of different spots throughout the year. And really, his biggest strength physically is, really his hands, catching the ball, catching in his frame, outside of the frame. We'd like to have him take a step in year two in terms of, taking further advantage of his targets and getting more familiarity with our offense. But we're pleased with him as a rookie. Would like to see all of our young players progress.
With Deshaun on the field, I think he even admitted that he wasn't his best season this year. How do you quantify the way that he played? Are you still as high on him?
Yeah, we're very excited about Deshaun. We are looking forward to continuing to evolve the offense over the next several months. Obviously, having him have a full off season going into 2023, and certainly expect him to play at a high level this upcoming year.
Time for us to take a quick time out from the NFL Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. Still plenty of Sports for CLE ahead. Tony Grossi, Nathan Zegura, Dan Labbe. We'll also hear more from Andrew Berry, what he had to say about the salary cap. Straight ahead when Sports for CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indy.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Sports for CLE continues from Indianapolis, Indiana. The NFL Scouting Combine. Earlier today, Andrew Berry met with media, talked about the salary cap, creating space, but also matching talent to the coaches that you have and the schemes they want to play.
Yeah, it's a good question, Scott. I think, really, we look at, really kind of two different mechanisms. We look at, the cash that we want to spend, and then the cap is really an accounting mechanism for that. The rules are flexible, whether it's, releasing a player, trading a player, restructuring a deal, negotiating an extension. There are a number of different avenues to create cap space, and the approach that we would take would really be dictated by the opportunities in front of us. Go ahead. No problem. No, you've been trying a couple different times, so yeah. Honestly, I get asked this question every year, and to be honest, I think going into any year, there's a lot of uncertainty. I've come to realize just how much you don't know in terms of prospects as they transition into the NFL. I know every year there are good players and players that we would target or players that will like the process, and that's no different than this year. But I firmly believe that there are going to be quality players every year, throughout the draft. So for me, it's always tough to talk about, maybe, whether it's, depth at the top, depth in the middle rounds, depth by position, because oftentimes we go and look back at those draft classes and it turns out a lot different than maybe we anticipate. So we try our best to go in with that, I guess that may be, intellectual humility with the fact that, what we think today may be a lot different than how we see it down the line.
Andrew, how much, since he's gotten in the building, has Jim had a kind of an input and made his mark in terms of personnel and kind of game planning out what the next couple of months look like for you?
Yeah, so we've always been a firm believer, as a front office in partnering with our coaching staff, and that has always been the case with Kevin. That will always be the case with our coordinators, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are able to map personnel, strengths, skill sets to the offense, defensive, or kicking game philosophy. And that'll be no different than with Jim. It certainly does help that, having worked with Jim before and having some level of familiarity, have a pretty good sense of, what he wants in different, different different parts of the defense. But that'll always be the case with our coaching staff. One second, Tony. Yeah, we would always stay in communication with our coaching staff or our coordinator for a decision like this. One of the first things we'll ask really any coach that is in the organization at the end of the year, evaluate their position group or evaluate their side of the ball, and then from there we'll have the meaningful strategic discussions as we modify the roster.
So the Browns feel they have their franchise quarterback. That means they better be ready to win, especially with the $230 million guaranteed contract that they gave to Deshaun Watson. So Andrew Berry talked about the sense of urgency the Browns have and the importance of a winning culture.
I feel urgency every year, Zach, to be honest. I mean, I think we all feel like we have an incredible responsibility to the organization and to the city, to put a good team out on the field. But I think that probably if you don't feel urgency, and honestly, you don't feel excitement, to be honest. Like, that's probably the biggest feeling. If you don't feel excitement, you're in the wrong role. I mean, too hard to say. I think it really just depends on circumstances and what opportunities come before us in the next several months. I don't have a crystal ball on that matter, but probably the easiest thing to say is, like, we are very excited and feel very good about the core of the team.
Andrew, when you talk about the sense of urgency, I know you try to balance short-term and long-term when you try to build the roster, but does it shift a little bit given the state of the roster, given the fact that it's 2 straight seasons without going to the playoffs?
No, I think every year your goal is to make sure that you get to the playoffs. And I do think that there are different points organizationally where your roster, your core is in a different place. We feel really good about a lot of our key and top players, being in the middle of their prime, and certainly think that this is a year where we can, be very competitive. But we want to be competitive every year. Like, that's really the goal. We want to be, playing deep into the season every year, and that'll be the goal. I think Kevin's level-headedness. Quite honestly, I think it's easy to ride the wave of emotion, for really any head coach in the NFL. And Kevin is very much a steady hand at the helm, and I think it serves our organization, and I think it serves our team very well.
So we talked a little bit about Jim Schwartz, the new defensive coordinator for the Browns. The new assistant head coach and special teams coordinator is Bubba Ventrone, Who knows Bubba Ventrone better than anybody? The Indianapolis Colts, where he was the special teams coach for the last several years. The Colts play-by-play man, Matt Taylor, talked about Bubba Ventrone and what the Browns are getting in their new special teams coach. Joined by Matt Taylor, play-by-play voice of the Indianapolis Colts. Matt, appreciate the time. I wanted to talk to you about Bubba Ventrone. You've been there for a while. You've gotten to know him. What are the Browns getting in Bubba Ventrone?
Well, he's a great guy, great personality, and he's a heck of a head coach, one of the best special team coaches in all of the NFL. I mean, I think it stems back to his playing days, right? He was a player in the NFL. He was a special teams ace, if you will. 4-year guy with the Browns, actually a captain on special teams a couple years there in Cleveland. So you're getting a guy with a high football acumen that gets the best out of his players on special teams. And with that, you have to know the entire roster. You have to know the strengths and the weaknesses of all 53 guys that can contribute and help you on special teams. And I think that's where Bubba shines.
As far as intensity, personality, what's he like? We've heard there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm.
Yeah, there's no doubt he's got a lot of energy. Again, I think that stems back to his former playing days. But he's a guy that's going to get, again, the best out of his players, and he's going to get after him in practice, right? He's going to have that high intensity. He's not going to accept, a lot of loafing, if you will, in practice. There's going to be a lot of again, I think practice makes perfect with Bubba Ventrone, and just learned a lot about the game from him. He would come down and he would sit in our radio studio every week for about 5-10 minutes, and we would just, shoot the bull, or we would, talk off the record about, the players on the team or the upcoming game and the challenges at hand that upcoming Sunday. So from that standpoint, I'm going to miss, learning about football from him, being around him. I just think he's a really infectious guy.
It sounds like you also think he's a guy that, could be starting to make that transition from special teams into head coach.
Right. I mean, I think that's a natural move. I mean, some say, well, why would you leave Indianapolis where you've built up a nice reputation and you've done some good things? It's sort of a lateral move, and it is in a sense, but also, right, he gets that tag of assistant head coach under Kevin Stefanski. So it's one step closer for him. He's on the record talking about he has aspirations of being a head coach one day in the National Football League. So, it's a gradual step for him. But I think the biggest thing that the Colts are going to miss in Bubba Ventrone is that on special teams, those were game-changing plays. I mean, I can think of a handful of games in the last 4 or 5 years the Colts won because they were just flat-out better on special teams. You go back to the block punts. The Colts have 4 block punts for touchdowns since 2018 under Bubba Ventrone. So they changed the game, right? Those special teams plays weren't just opportunities for the fans to go to the bathroom or go to the concession stand. I mean, the Colts also scored 7 touchdowns on special teams since 2018, which I think is number 1 in the league, tied with New England in that span. So they changed the game. He gets the most out of his roster in terms of the players that he has on special teams, and I just think he's a budding star in this league.
What about players? What do they say about him? How do they respond to him?
Well, they really respond to him. And again, they know he played the game, and so there is that level of accountability that this guy knows what he's talking about. It's not just coach speak. He's been there. He's been in their shoes before. And I think, too, what Bubba is also really good at is developing guys into bigger roles down the road. I mean, I can think of, guys like Zaire Franklin, who in his first 3 years in the NFL, he was a core special teams player. All of a sudden, he goes from that to a guy you can't take off the field on defense. So he's able to allow guys to take on bigger roles, kind of stay within themselves. Same thing with a player like Isaiah Rodgers and Dallas Flowers or Zach Pascal. These are the guys that immediately come to mind over the years that have been special teams players but have grown into key contributors for the Colts either on offense or defense.
Sounds like he's the type of guy you want on your coaching staff.
Oh, no question about it. Again, I just think he's infectious. I think he gets along with everybody, but I think everybody, too, again, offense or defense, really appreciates what his role is as he tries to change the game in that third phase of the game.
Matt Taylor, play-by-play voice of the Indianapolis Colts. Thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, piece of cake.
All right, sure sounds like the Browns got exactly what they need in a special teams coordinator in Bubba Ventrone. We're going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Still plenty ahead on Sports4CLE from the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. We will have Browns beat reporters Dan Labbe, Tony Grossi, as well as Browns color analyst Nathan Zegura. Sports4CLE talking Browns from the NFL Scouting Combine. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're pleased to be joined by Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Dan, you tweeted out some news that became official relative to the Hall of Fame game. Take us through that.
Yeah, well, Browns fans who maybe missed the days of 4 preseason games, they're going to get it back this year. The Browns and Jets are going to play in the Hall of Fame game, kind of like we all expected with Joe Thomas going in. That'll be the Thursday before the induction. It's August 3rd at 8 p.m. They'll play the Jets, who have Darrelle Revis and Joe Klecko going in. So it should be a great time for Browns fans. The Muni lot is going to move south to Canton for the weekend, and it should be an absolute circus down there, I'd imagine.
So it's official. To get the extra preseason game, you can use it. You're going to have a new offense. You're going to have new defensive tackles and a new defensive coordinator and a new special teams coach. We heard Andrew Berry talk. What's your biggest takeaway from what we heard?
You know, I think the thing that stood out is he kind of admitted that they're going to have to look into restructuring that Deshaun Watson contract. And it's not a surprise because that cap hit is so high. And that's sort of how you structure these contracts. And when you're the quarterback, that's what you do as a GM and as a football team. You look at that quarterback's contract and figure out, how do I move that money around and make that cap number a little bit less so we can bring in more talent, bring in more guys. So it's not surprising that they would consider doing that. It is a little surprising that I don't want to say he admitted it, but he did at least indicate it was possible. So I think that's really kind of the next big domino to watch here.
Yeah, and there'll probably be more. Everybody knows they're going to be restructuring contracts to create cap space so they can add. It's not like they're going to create $80 million in cap space, but they'll be able to add what they would like to build out the rest of the roster.
Yeah, and if you want to swim in the deep end of the pool, you might be looking at a safe. I mean, let's say they like Jesse Bates from Cincinnati. He might cost you $14 or $15 million a year, so you've got to obviously free up that money. I don't know if they're going to spend big on a defensive tackle, especially with Deron Payne getting franchised today, but they're going to spend some money there, I would imagine, and you don't want to just rely on, well, let's bring in a 3rd-round pick or a 4th-round pick to come in and be a starter, a key starter on this defense. You want those guys to be experienced, so they're going to have to find money to spend, and that's the beauty of the NFL, right? Like, there's a hard cap, but it's not really a hard cap. You can maneuver around, and you got a bunch of Ivy Leaguers in the front office. They'll be able to figure it out.
The other thing, I would assume, and maybe it's not an accurate assumption, what are your thoughts? Do you think they go and find somebody that is familiar with the way Jim Schwartz wants the defensive line to be played?
It wouldn't surprise me, and I think when you go back to the Philadelphia days, he went out and they found some veterans to add. I'm thinking of a guy like a Chris Long, who maybe didn't have a history with Jim Schwartz, but just more bodies to throw at it. So if you can find some of those affordable veterans to come in who maybe want to try and win late in their career, I think they could do that. And yeah, I do think this team needs some leadership on that defensive side. I think they really lacked that. They were too young. And if you can bring in a guy who knows Jim Schwartz and knows what he expects, whether it's at your deep safety position or a defensive tackle or an edge rusher, even if it's a role player, I think that's valuable, and I think that's something Jim Schwartz will probably push for behind the scenes.
Now, they have young guys from a year ago from the draft on the defensive line that didn't, that they were given the opportunity, didn't really seize it. Mm-hmm. Do you kind of see them waiting on them to develop, and does that free up the ability to maybe not necessarily draft as many defensive linemen as we thought they might?
I think it's risky if you're going to rely too heavily on those guys. And I think we saw that this year with the defensive tackle position. They took a flyer on Taven Bryan, and they decided to hand Jordan Elliott that job, and it didn't work out. Perrion Winfrey didn't do anything with that job. I'm a little concerned about Alex Wright moving forward. I think he can develop into a useful player, but he didn't have a sack this year. I don't think he had a quarterback hit this year, like an official quarterback hit in the stat sheet this year. So it was concerning, his lack of ability to even affect the quarterback. So I think he's got a long ways to go. Isaiah Thomas, that's such a low pick. You just don't know what you're going to get out of a guy like that. So I think they'll continue to add to that stable through the draft. But I don't think they could go into this season thinking Alex Wright's going to be our number 2 or our number 3. I think they have to account for that with a veteran in free agency, and whatever you get out of Alex Wright this year is kind of a bonus.
How many defensive linemen do you think they add? Veterans?
I would say at least 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
And, we might be talking one bigger money guy and then a couple of lower tier guys you bring in for $3-4 million a year. But I think you've got to add 3 new guys on that line through free agency alone.
The other thing is Jim Schwartz is a little different. He says he likes to wave them in. So there will be probably more defensive linemen playing 25, 30 snaps a game.
Yeah, and it's sort of the hockey change, right? You have your starters, and then you bring in your second unit, and then you bring your starters back in. And I think for a guy like Myles Garrett, who I think struggles sometimes, loses his breath. He obviously, the year he had COVID, a big deal with that was because he does have asthma, and it can cause problems. So, I think for Myles, it helps to give him a rest and maybe only rush him on third down some series and do things like that. So I think the more that you can bring guys in and kind of do those hockey line changes, the better.
What about the free safety? Obviously, they need a free safety. That's the reason that they admit they're going to look to either trade or they'll probably do a post-June 1st cut of John Johnson III because it saves them almost $10 million in the cap. What are they looking for in that spot? Does it have to be a big name guy, or?
I don't know that it has to be. Again, I think Jesse Bates would be an interesting guy to bring in. I do wonder, are you kind of doing what you just did with John Johnson, going and spending money to fill that need? But I think it's a more traditional free safety. John's a guy that can play in the box. He could kind of play all over. I think he was a little miscast here. I think with Jim Schwartz, Grant Delpit's going to be your in-the-box safety. And then I think you go out and you find a good deep safety. Malcolm Jenkins was a little bit of that for Philadelphia. So I think that's what it looks like. It's a guy that can be that center fielder in Jim Schwartz's defense because he'll play a fair amount of single high.
So, you've got Amari Cooper. Donovan Peoples-Jones had a nice season a year ago, stepped up nicely. Do you think they look to add another weapon for Deshaun Watson?
I think they have to. And I think, really the only guy that I would write in pen in his current role would be Amari Cooper. Now, that doesn't mean DPJ doesn't have a role. It doesn't mean he can't be the number 2 when all is said and done. But I think if they can go out and get another guy to be a second outside receiver, or I think if they can get kind of a shifty, quick guy to play in the slot, I think they really didn't have that this year. I think they wanted Jakeem Grant to maybe bring that a little bit. I don't know if you can count on that now, coming off an Achilles at age 30. But I think those are the 2 things. If they can find a bigger outside receiver, they might take a look. But definitely they've got to find a slot guy who's fast and can move and who's twitchy.
Would you expect a trade of any sort of type? I mean, Andrew Berry has been really kind of on the forefront with that.
Yeah, I would never rule out a trade with this GM. And we saw it last year with Amari Cooper, and it was actually a great move. It was one of his best moves to get ahead of the market, and before that wide receiver market blew up, he had brought in Amari Cooper for like a 5th-round pick. So he's going to do that, and with these younger GMs, they kind of think like NBA GMs in a lot of ways, and that's where the trading comes in. And hey, we're going to give you this pick for this guy. We're going to take this contract off your hands. I'll never forget the Brock Osweiler trade. That was like an NBA. We're going to take this contract, and you're going to give us picks. That's how Andrew Berry thinks.
The other thing is he admitted, as we sit here last day of February, we got a lot of work to do on the roster, and yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, they've got to free up money. And frankly, you won 7 games last year, so something was amiss. Either the coaching wasn't good enough, your roster wasn't good enough, or probably most likely a little bit of everything. So they've addressed the coaching, they brought in a new D coordinator, a new special teams coordinator, and now you got to attack this roster, and you've got to continue to get this roster better, and you've got to take an unflinching look at some things. So John Johnson III, right? One of his marquee free agent signings. It didn't work. You just have to suck it up and move on. And that's sort of where the Browns are in this roster build.
Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we will continue talking Browns. We'll get into Bubba Ventrone as well as the draft. Sports4CLE talking Browns from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. We'll be right back.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns from the NFL Scouting Combine, Indianapolis, Indiana, along with Browns beat reporter from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, Dan Labbe. I'm Dave Bacon. Dan, the Browns don't have a first-round pick because of the Deshaun Watson trade. What do you think what do they look at 42?
You know what I think is interesting about Andrew Berry is he always talks about, I think he's more of a best player guy. It's not always about fit. And I think we saw that last year. I don't think anybody had cornerback on the board as their first pick. Either wide receiver, edge rusher. You could have gone any number of ways. And they go and get Martin Emerson. And Martin Emerson is a pretty good player. And he's been a good addition. And there's a lot of upside there. So he's really hard to read. So, his first two drafts, it was pretty obvious. They need a left tackle, go get one. They need a cornerback. I thought Greg Newsome was the right pick there at number 26. I thought they needed another corner. I think wide receiver is something to look at. I still think edge rusher is always on the table, but I would lean wide receiver. But the thing about Andrew Berry, if there's somebody else he likes, he's going to take him. And it doesn't matter if it's a fit. I don't think he's going to take a center or a guard. But if there's, another cornerback that he likes, I wouldn't rule anything out.
You mentioned guard or offensive line guard or center. Let's talk left tackle. Jedrick Wills is a guy. A lot of people are like, they should pick up their fifth round. Now they shouldn't pick up I think he's kind of being compared to the 10th overall pick instead of. No, I'm not defending him. There are some plays that you look at and you go, man, you got to give me more than that. But he is probably an average to slightly above average left tackle.
Yeah, and I think they like him still. I think they really think there's some upside there. Andrew Berry talked pretty glowingly about him today. He's never going to just tell us outright he's going to pick up the fifth-year option. I got the impression, though, that that's what they're going to do, and it makes sense, even though it's fully guaranteed now when you pick it up. I still think it makes sense at the cost to give him that other year, to give him one more year after this year to show what he can do. And you have to ask yourself the question, who's going to play that position if it's not Jed Wills? So maybe Jed isn't a Pro Bowler. Maybe he isn't, maybe he's top half, borderline top half left tackle, but who are you going to get if it's not him? It's okay to continue to develop him, and if you have a backup plan, great, like you did at center this year. But I don't have an issue with them picking up that fifth-year option on Wills.
Yeah, $14.5 million. That's kind of middle of the road for.
Yeah,
I think it's $14.75, but it ends up being slotted middle of the road. Left tackles make a lot of money when they're elite.
Yeah, exactly, and you can figure things out after that. So you pay him that, or look, if he delivers and he's really good, you can maybe change that number a little bit with an extension. So there's some flexibility after they get through this year if he shows you he's the guy. But I just think you pick up that option and you kind of hope that these next 2 years you see that development under Bill Callahan.
We talked a little bit about new defensive coordinator, new special teams coach as well. What do you think of Bubba Ventrone? And from everything you hear about him, it's kind of an injection of energy that I think the team needed.
I've said all offseason, like, I'm not going to let the Browns win this offseason. I'm not going to be like, they won the offseason, they did it. But this was a winning hire. This was one of the, if they were going to say they won the offseason, they won this game here, hiring Bubba Ventrone. And, I think Kevin Stefanski played the game the right way. I don't think Mike Prefer was going to be back. I know it took a while to kind of move on from him, but he wanted to make sure the right guy was available. And I think when he kind of sensed the opportunity to get Bubba Ventrone when things changed in Indianapolis, he jumped on it. And they made him associate head coach. That's a big title. This is a guy that wants to be a head coach in this league. I think this was an absolute home run of a hire. And it has nothing to do with him being a former Brown. He's just really good at what he does.
Yeah, and it brings a different personality. I think Jim Schwartz brings a different personality. And again, I'm not talking poorly about coaches that were here before. I think the more varied the personalities you have, the better chance you have to reach your team.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think one of the things Kevin has done is he's sort of addressed some of his deficiencies a little bit this offseason. Now we'll see, that can be a little concerning, right? Like, well, if you can't do it and have to hire somebody else to do it, are we sure you're the right guy? But I also think it's a good sign to identify some of those things and say, okay, maybe I need a little more fire out of my defensive coordinator. Maybe I need a little more fire out of my special teams coach. I need some more motivators, because not that Kevin can't motivate people, but he's a different type of leader and a different type of motivator. So I think it's going to help Kevin a lot that he basically has 2 head coaches on his staff, and now he can focus on the offense, because that's going to be vital to him keeping this job, and it's going to be vital to the Browns being successful.
Yeah, and you know, I kind of, when it was Jim Schwartz, I said I want Bill Callahan of the defense, and I think that's kind of what I think Jim Schwartz is. Let's shift gears. Offense. How different does this offense look with Deshaun Watson?
I think it's a lot more shotgun, right? I mean, I think that's the obvious thing. I think bringing in a guy like Bill Musgrave is interesting, because when he was at Cal, a lot of shotgun, a lot of 11 personnel. I think they'll explore that. I still think Kevin has a penchant for some of the heavier personnel and doing some funky things with that, spreading out 3 tight ends. You know, we see Kyle Shanahan do that too. So I think he still likes to do that stuff. But I think he'll explore more with 11 personnel and just opening things up for Deshaun Watson. And the reality is, when Deshaun Watson's your quarterback, he's going to hold the football. And you just sort of have to function. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is the same way. You just have to function within that reality and get your offensive line, you know, make sure they're blocking longer, get them ready for that. I thought that was an issue in the final 6 games. They had to change the way they blocked, really, in a lot of ways. So I think we're going to see, like I said, a more spread offense, and pace, I think, is going to be different. They're going to run more hurry up. They're going to be quicker. They're going to try and let Deshaun do some things at the line. So there's a lot of things they can explore still.
It also sounds, and I'm sure we'll hear, Kevin Stefanski's talking here at the Combine tomorrow. I'm sure we'll hear more about this. It certainly sounds like he and Deshaun are exchanging ideas. They're tied together at the hip, and that's what, I mean, you need that. That's the head coach and the quarterback on successful teams are tied at the hip, and if you get good ones, they're there for a decade.
And look, the reality for Kevin Stefanski is this. Deshaun Watson, they gave up 3 first-round picks and more, and they guaranteed him $230 million. So you have to figure out a way to make that work. Deshaun Watson's not going anywhere. If he starts to sour on Kevin Stefanski, then now you're in trouble. Now you got to start reworking this offense, and that's when Kevin ends up on the hot seat a little bit. So he's got to be open to Deshaun Watson's ideas. You know, he's kind of got the power in this situation, if you will. So I think he's going to be very open-minded with Deshaun, and I think that's a good thing, because it takes Kevin out of his comfort zone a little bit too.
Yeah, and you know what? If you're paying a guy that much money, you better find a way to showcase him and make his skill set kind of shine.
And it affects the way you build the roster, right? You can't spend as much money elsewhere. Even if you redo that cap number, you still are paying him a lot of money. So, you know, it's got to be about Deshaun Watson. That's what your offense is built around, and that's a good problem to have. That's why when you identify a guy that you think is an elite quarterback and you want to pay him, that's fine. That's the problem you want to have. You want to have it cost $200.
I mean, how long has it been since you have had one here that you considered a franchise quarterback? You know, either have one or you're looking for one, and the Browns feel like they found one.
Yeah, I mean, like, it would have been great if Baker Mayfield would have developed into that guy, right? If he would have been the guy you were paying $200 million or whatever the number would have been. You know, Joe Burrow is going to get paid a ton of money probably this offseason. That's the problem you want to have, because it means you finally have your guy.
Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. As always, appreciate the time and the insight. Appreciate it very much, Dan.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we continue talking Browns. Tony Grossi joins us from the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. Sports4CLE will be right back.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to OhioLottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, and we are pleased to be joined by Tony Grossi, Browns beat reporter for ESPN 850 AM Cleveland, as well as the Land on Demand. Tony, we just listened to Andrew Berry's talk. Some of the takeaways that you had from what he said.
Well, I was a little surprised that he confirmed that John Johnson is going to be leaving the team. You know, usually Andrew doesn't drop news, but it's been widely reported throughout the day, so I guess they figure it was time. He seems very calm at this point of the transaction season. If everyone believes this is the most urgent offseason in Browns history, probably is because it's the next one. He seems like he's up for the task. So they got a lot of work to do, though. A lot of players to plug in for some new coordinators, particularly on defense.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Jim Schwartz, we talked a little bit earlier today. I love the hire. You've been around the Browns in the NFL much longer than I am, and I mean that respectfully. Yeah. What did you think of the hire?
Oh, I thought it was a home run from the moment they identified their, I think, 5 candidates. I rated Schwartz number 1 and Brian Flores 1B, and I think Schwartz his track record as proven defensive coordinator. With the style of defense that they play, it's not going to be dissimilar. It's a 4-3, and also his let's say enthusiasm about analytics made it a no-brainer for this group, right? But Jim's been doing it long before that word was even used. So I thought that was a great hire and exactly the right guy for this time and place.
We'll get to Bubba Ventrone in a minute, but defensively, what do you expect to see from a Jim Schwartz defense with the Browns?
Well, he tends to make the defensive linemen stars. He believes pass defense starts with the pass rush. You know, recently a lot of people believe it starts at the back end, and I never understood that. So maybe hopefully this represents a shift in their focus from the back end to the front end. And I asked Andrew Berry that specifically, and he kind of talked around it, but that's the way I took that hire. It's time to focus resources, energy, and capital into the defensive front.
Is Jim Schwartz the type of defensive coordinator, do you think, that can make some of the young guys better? Just by, he's going to say, all right, this guy doesn't do this, let's not ask him to do that.
Well, his track record with several teams is that he gets the most out of his defensive players, whether they're high-priced free agents or high draft picks or medium draft picks. So, yeah, I think, they need some improvement on the front of the depth chart there, right? They need some veteran starters, I believe. But I think that doesn't mean that the guys they've drafted along the way aren't going to be developed. So I think that's, a major task of his to do that in addition to finding the right pieces up front this year.
He is a guy that players like playing for. So you would think the young guys are kind of the developmental guys. They may not go as heavy in the draft defensive line as some people think because they have those young guys.
Exactly. I really think mock drafts prior to free agency are worthless, unless you have the first or second pick. By the time the draft rolls around in end of April, the Browns will have acquired, I believe, at least a couple defensive linemen, and those will have the most impact, and that would free Berry up to using that number 2 pick on other needs, which I think the other need is wide receiver. So that's the way I'm looking at this transaction season. We'll see, how they go from there. Andrew Berry said, "Hey, opportunity sometimes, if a veteran receiver is offered to him, like Amari Cooper was last year, hey, you got to pounce on it." But I think that they attacked the defensive line in free agency because you're right, they got a lot of young players there that he has to develop.
Do you think they go, high end, 18 million, or do you see him doing more of the 6, 7 and getting a couple of them that can come in and plug in?
Again, it's going to depend on who's available. Today on Tuesday, the Washington Commanders franchised Deron Payne, who was probably would have been the number 1 available defensive tackle in free agency. So you cross that one off the list. But I think they have him rated. And I would think you do one of the high end and one of the year by year guys, right? But I think Schwartz's record is he likes veterans up front. They are, as we've said, they've already got the young guys on hand. But you need someone to teach those guys his system. It might help if you've played for Schwartz, and there's a number of players who may be available who have.
All right, let's shift our attention. Bubba Ventrone, special teams coach, assistant head coach, got that title. What do you think of that hire?
Another slam dunk. I thought that was a great hire. A proven record in Indianapolis, 5 years as special teams coach. We remember him as a player. Special teams is what kept him in the NFL. He played his heart out on special teams, and now has carried that over as a coach. So I think he'll be a difference maker as a coach. I think both of them will, Schwartz and Bubba Ventrone. So that's the first step in correcting problems. Those were the two biggest problems, defense and special teams, and I thought Kevin Stefanski did a great job in addressing them.
When you look at Ventrone, he kind of has the reputation of being very excitable, loud, energy. Is that something that you like as well?
Absolutely. Kevin's demeanor is not like that. But I think you need somebody, if you're not going to be like that, surround yourself with others who are. And even to a degree, Jim Schwartz is like that. He might not be like that on game day, but he is at practice. And Bubba is like the prototypical special teams coach. Remember Bill Cowher running up and down the sideline when in the 80s with the Browns when he broke in as special teams coach. That enthusiasm is such a vital ingredient in that job. It's a thankless job, those players running down on kicks and blocking and stuff. But I think that'll be contagious to those guys too.
And you mentioned coaches have to be themselves. Kevin can't become a rah-rah guy because players see through the players. A locker room is a place where you really can't hide who you are.
Right. So if you're not that person, find somebody who is to balance it, to bring some energy. This team needs energy, right? And I'm not saying that Stefanski drains the energy from them. It's just that some coaches are pump up their units, and Kevin's responsible for the offense primarily on game days. So having those two coaches coach those other units, I think are going to make a big difference on game days.
Tony Grossi, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Tony Grossi, ESPN 850 AM Cleveland, also the Land on Demand. Always really good Browns coverage. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. More from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. We're talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to OhioLottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Sports4CLE continues from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we're pleased to be joined by Nathan Zegura, color analyst for Browns Radio Network, Browns Live. You're just all over the place with Browns coverage. Nathan, you heard Andrew Berry talk today. What were takeaways from it?
Well, with Andrew Berry, you're not going to get a whole lot. He's going to fill the time. He's going to make it interesting, but not give away any of the secrets, obviously. And I think that was what he did today. I think the big takeaways were you heard the Browns will be moving on from John Johnson. They have a few options there. They can trade him. Obviously, they can cut him, or they can cut him with a post-June 1st designation. If they do that, it'll save about $9 million on the cap this year. So that's probably the most likely outcome right now. It creates another hole on the defense. He noted that it is possible that they will restructure the contract of quarterback Deshaun Watson, which is again probably likely. They've got to get under the cap. They got to create some space, and so they can pursue free agents, pursue some trade opportunities, and so that's one of the big mechanisms they have to do. That's probably not the only restructure they will do, but those are probably the main things. He's not going to tell you much. Somebody asked, I think, who's the starting center? You're not going to get that in February, but AB, they've come into it. Fourth draft now, 4th offseason. They've got a process, but it's a unique one because now you've got the franchise quarterback in place and the benefits of that, and then also some of the restraints from a money standpoint that come with having a quarterback on a second contract like that.
Now, you do have restraints, but they also have contracts that are structured so you can get below the cap to do the things you need to do. I think that's the other message that there was. We'll look to take advantage of opportunities, but we can do some things.
Yeah, the Browns are actually in a good spot, and the cap is something that is it's more of a theoretical, and they'll be able to move it, and every year you kind of kick the can down the line, but the cap keeps going up, and so that's kind of, I think, some of the thinking there. But the Browns, I think, are very aware, and you've heard there's urgency, there is pressure because Miles is in his prime, Nick Chubb's in his prime, Denzel's in his prime, Bitonio, Wyatt, your core guys are in their primes, and your quarterback, Deshaun Watson. So you're going to have to win now. It's going to be hard to keep that core together for a long time, so the time is now.
Relative to the defensive line obviously is an area that it appears they would be upgrading. Do you think they go higher end free agent? Do you think they go couple of guys that are mid to bargain free agents, or do they go draft?
Probably some combination of all of that. I think higher end free agent, that's going to be tough. There are only so many, and now Deron Payne's been franchised, so if you're looking on the interior of the defensive line, you can cross his name off the list. I think there are, the high end, Hargrave coming out of Philadelphia would be interesting, but it's probably more likely that you'll get, say, somebody like a Sheldon Rankins, a former first-round pick. You could get on a one-year deal, played good football for the Jets a year ago, or his running mate on the Jets as well. So I think there's some options on the interior that would be cheaper. I think this is a great edge draft class, so it wouldn't surprise me. I think a lot of people are looking at the second round and thinking defensive tackle there. It probably is going to end up being an edge or potentially a speed wide receiver, which is the one thing that they need on offense. So I think they're going to attack it in a variety of ways. They always do. If you look historically, they would draft a guy and then also sign a guy in that position. So that would be my guess. You're going into it right now. You've got Miles as a starter for sure. The rest of your defensive line, you maybe need 3 new starters. You're hoping that Perrion Winfrey, who showed big flashes over the second half of last season, that he can continue to develop and kind of sort out some of the things associated with becoming a professional in the NFL. But there are holes on that defensive line. I think that is, that's the biggest need on this football team right now. So I think you will have to attack it with multiple assets.
The guys that they had that were rookies a season ago, they didn't blow anybody away, but you don't expect a guy to come in that you drafted in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round and do that. Are these guys that you think Jim Schwartz kind of tweaks a little bit and they have a little bit more success?
Well, I would say MJ Emerson was excellent in his rookie season, the 3rd rounder, our first pick in the draft, but you're talking more on the defensive line, and so that comes down to Alex Wright. Didn't have a sack as a rookie. They knew he was a project coming from University of Alabama, Birmingham, that it was going to take him some time, but the time is now, and that's one of the questions that I'm sure can Alex Wright start for us? Is he ready to start for us? And certainly from a pass rushing standpoint, you would say no. So he's somebody, though, that clearly is in the mix, but you probably need to add to that a veteran pass rusher on the outside. Perry, and I thought, showed excellent flashes, but, some of it is just kind of understanding what it takes to be consistently good week in and week out in this league. But I think he's the one that has the talent. He didn't go in the 4th round for a lack of talent because of talent issues. He's the one who has the talent, I think, to become a star in this defense. Jim Schwartz has always had a Pro Bowler on the defensive tackle, in that defensive tackle room, and I think it's an opportunity there with Perrion Winfrey to take a big step forward.
And I think Perrion Winfrey probably realizes that. This is a guy that can make a career for me if I do the right things. They created a hole at free safety. How do you think they plug that?
Yeah, that's probably going to have to be a veteran. And there are a lot of, I think, good options in free agency this year. I know a lot of people talk about Jesse Bates. I don't know if they'll go that high end or if they even think that he's the right fit for what they want to do, but I think that they'll have to explore that in free agency and then probably draft somebody as well. And as I said, that's been the MO. If you look back, free agency, like the first year they had free agency, you had in free agency, you got John Johnson, you got Jed Wills, you got Jack Conklin, and then you got Austin Hooper. You drafted that year Harrison Bryant, you drafted that year Jed Wills, and then you also drafted, I think, Rich LeCount towards the end of that draft. So that's kind of been the MO all along, and so it wouldn't surprise me to see that continue to be the case.
You mentioned speed wide receiver. Do you think they specifically go out and get that? They got to find somebody that can turn a 4-yard Deshaun Watson pass into a 12-yard gain.
Well, it's not just that, and it's the ability to stretch the field, push the safeties back, create space for the great route running of Amari Cooper, create space in the seam for David Njoku, create space for Donovan Peoples-Jones Peoples-Jones and create space for Nick Chubb. And so I think that's critical. You look at the Super Bowl champions the last few years, they can all throw the football. They all are top 8 scoring offenses. Typically they're top 5 scoring offenses, and you need that threat that expands the field with their speed vertically and horizontally. So free agency, it's maybe McCole Hardman, maybe a Paris Campbell. It's not a great free agent class right now at receiver, but that's something they could look at in the draft as well. If they go, say, in the second round, the kid from Cincinnati whose name
Tyler Scott.
Tyler Scott.
Yep.
So he reminds a lot of people of Tyler Lockett. That would be a great fit for this team. We talked with Daniel Jeremiah earlier over on Browns Daily about that, and so he thinks that would be a great fit. So I think that is something. That's a luxury. We were still a top 10 offense with Jacoby, without that speed receiver last year. So it's a luxury, but I think it's a luxury you have to be a Super Bowl contender. I think everything we're talking about on the defense, you've got to get that done so that you can be a playoff team. But if you want to be a team that can win the Super Bowl, you've got to be able to score, and I think that comes from that speed receiver.
Are you at all concerned about Deshaun Watson? I mean, you think about it. Didn't play for 2 years, almost 2 years. Then he's in a new system with new teammates. 11 weeks, everybody is out, and he comes in. He didn't look like Deshaun Watson, but I don't know why. I mean, I expected him to, but that was probably unfair.
I think what you saw from Deshaun Watson were flashes, even in every single game, of things that we've never seen a Browns quarterback do, at least in the last decade, and this will be my 11th season with the team. So I saw a lot of the wow plays. I think you look at the final 2 games, 5 touchdowns passing in those games against Washington. Really, it was the final 3 halves of football, because he had 3 touchdowns in that second half against Washington, which was the best half he played, 2 touchdowns against Pittsburgh. I'm not worried about Deshaun Watson. I think full off season, they're going to tweak things that are going to play to his strengths. I think that he's very excited about it. They're going to make those additions. You know, I think they're going to get him another playmaker. I think he's going to be excellent. I think that it was unfair, and I was guilty of it too, to think that he was going to be able to just step in there and be the Deshaun Watson of old. We saw flashes, even in the game in Cincinnati, where we didn't put a ton of points on the board. There were throws, there were plays, him extending plays, him driving the football, that we haven't seen that kind of talent before. There was a pass to Donovan Peoples-Jones. I remember talking to DPJ after that, and he goes, that's the first time in my career the ball caught me. It just hit him so perfectly in stride. So, yeah, I have a lot of confidence in his talent. I know his work ethic, and I know that right now a lot of people are kind of counting Deshaun Watson out, and that's motivating him, and I think he will be just fine.
Do you think this offense looks significantly different and is tailored to Deshaun Watson?
Yeah, I think it's got to be. I think you're going to see more stuff out of the shotgun, maybe some more freedom from him, and I think, you know, for Deshaun, he's also going to take more of the layups that this offense provides. If you just kind of follow the reads, you can be very successful in this offense, and I think that's something he'll get from the reps, from the rhythm of playing it, and just understanding that, hey, I've got a full season. I don't have to try to do everything here in 6 games. I have a full season to do it. So, yeah, I think it will look differently. I think we'll have more 11 personnel out there, the 3 wide receivers. That comes with getting that speed guy. I think our shotgun run game will be especially more varied than it was this year. It's fairly kind of standard in the few runs that we ran out of the shotgun. So I think there's going to be a lot that will take advantage of that all year.
And that should, you know, people are wondering, how is Nick Chubb going to run out of the shotgun? I think pretty well, because Nick Chubb is going to say, not 9 guys there?
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
That's going to be the big change. There's going to be so many light boxes. And Nick Chubb, I think as you saw them start to get going together, we saw that get a lot better. And of course, as a running back, you want to run out in situations where you're facing 6, 7-man boxes and not the 9 that you saw earlier in his career. And I think Nick Chubb could easily have a career year. It won't be probably the same volume, but I think he has an opportunity to be incredibly explosive this year, and I think he'll thrive.
Nathan Zegura, appreciate the time and the insight. Nathan Zegura, analyst for the Browns Radio Network, host of Browns Daily. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here from the Combine in Indianapolis tomorrow at 4. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.